Hello, this is Chef John from foodwishes.com with how to make a calzone. That's right, we're finally going to do calzone, one of the most requested recipes we haven't gotten to yet. And before we get started, I probably should mention I'm more of a pizza guy, so I've actually only made calzone a handful of times. But despite that, I do consider myself somewhat of an expert, because I'm on the internet. So I am looking forward to passing along all my expertise for what really is a shockingly simple recipe. So let's go ahead and get started, and first up, a little tip about mozzarella cheese. If you are using fresh mozzarella, which I highly recommend, what we're going to want to do is slice it nice and thin and put it on a paper towel to kind of wick away that excess moisture. And by the way, if you're using the mozzarella from the supermarket that looks and feels like a white rubber ball, you don't have to do this. So that's good, I guess. And you know what? I just realized I got a little too much here. That's better. And once that's set, we can move on to the dough. So for one single calzone, you're going to need 6 ounces of pizza dough, which is exactly 1/4 of our Wolfgang Puck-inspired pizza dough recipe, which is the one I'm recommending here. And I'll tell you why in the blog. So we'll put that down on a well-floured surface, and we'll sprinkle a little more over the top. And as usual, we only want to use enough flour so the dough doesn't stick. So if it does seem like you've put too much down, like it did to me here, brush some away. And then all we're going to do is flatten that dough out into some sort of round shape. And at that point, I'm going to switch to a rolling pin and roll this out to about 8 or 9 inches wide. And I do like the rolling pin for this. But if you are an accomplished pizza dough stretcher or spinner, go ahead and do your thing. Hopefully we're all going to get to the same place, which like I said is about an 8 or 9 inch round piece of dough about 1/8 of an inch thick. And unlike if we were making pizza, we really don't want the dough on the edges any thicker than the dough on the inside. So what I like to do when I have the right size, I'll take my rolling pin and just kind of go around flattening out those edges just a little bit. And hopefully that will make sense when you see how we fold this up. And then once our dough has been prepped, we'll start laying down our ingredients. And we're going to start with the first of 2 kinds of hams. I'm going to lay down a couple slices of prosciutto. You can use prosciutto, which is the same thing. And we're just going to lay our fillings down on half the dough, being sure to leave about 1 inch of plain dough around the edge. So we'll lay down a couple slices of prosciutto, followed by the first of 2 cheeses, which would be some ricotta, also referred to more commonly as ricotta. And don't be stingy here. This is the main ingredient. And by the way, because I'm kind of fancy, I'm using an incredibly delicious local sheep's milk ricotta, which is just amazing. And by the way, that's a good tip, because there's only a few ingredients in this. We're going to want to use the highest quality possible. So we will spoon down our ricotta, and then before we add the other ham and the other cheese, what we'll do is we'll season this up a little bit with some freshly ground black pepper, and then a little BFC. And if you're new around here, that just means a little bit of cayenne. And then once that's been seasoned, we will top our ricotta with the second type of ham, which is just plain old regular ham that I diced up. So really, any kind of smoked deli-style ham will work here. So we'll place over some ham. Again, being careful we have a border of plain dough going around the edge. And then once the ham is placed down, we can finish this off with our mozzarella, which should be nicely drained by now. And that is going to be it for the filling. And what we have here is my take on a very traditional calzone, but it should be painfully obvious you could stuff this with whatever you want. You are the Al Capone of your calzone. Sometimes I have to add a syllable for those to work. And even then. But anyway, no matter what you fill this with, once you're done, this is how we're going to fold it up. So the first thing I think we should do is take a damp fingertip. I'm just dipping it into a little water. And I do like to go around and kind of moisten the edge of that dough, because depending on how long it took you to fill this, the surface of that dough may have dried out a little bit. And we want to make sure those 2 layers of dough stick really well together. So by dabbing that with a tiny bit of water, we're going to make it a little bit sticky, which will help it seal. And then once that's been accomplished, we will grab our dough and fold that over the top, kind of stretching it just past our filling, just to where our plain border of dough starts. And we'll kind of tap that down with our fingers just to keep it in place. And then what we'll do, and this is what really seals this together, we'll take that extra dough, we'll start folding it over, going around, kind of crimping it like this. And because we did leave ourselves with enough plain dough, by the time we've worked our way from one end to the other, we should have a very strong and secure seal. And by the way, don't worry about any kind of design around the edge. No matter how you've done it, it's going to look amazing once it bakes. So that should help you relax a little bit. And at this point, we can transfer that onto our baking sheet. But before we do, I want to sprinkle down a little cornmeal. That's going to help keep this from sticking, as well as provide some textural interest to the bottom crust. So we'll do a little bit of cornmeal, which brings us to the most terrifying part of the whole procedure, transferring this onto the pan. Because you're going to be afraid it's going to fall apart, but it won't. Assuming that this is not stuck to the table, so you should probably check for that. But assuming it's not stuck, we're just going to grab that with both hands confidently and quickly transfer it onto our sheet pan. And I said confidently. Do not hesitate. A calzone can sense fear. And once that's been successfully transferred to our pan, we're going to need to take the tip of a knife and make some air vents, especially if you're using a fresh mozzarella like we did, because there's going to be a lot of moisture in there, which means a lot of steam. And if that doesn't vent up through these holes at the top, who knows where that's going to come out? But you can be sure it won't be in a good spot. So I'm going to make 3 holes on the top like you see here. And then once our holes are made, we'll go ahead and paint this with a little bit of an egg wash, which is just 1 whole egg beaten with a couple teaspoons of water. And we'll brush that over. And then last but not least, a very light dusting of Parmesan cheese. And as I mentioned earlier, we're only going to use the best ingredients for this. So we will be going with the Parmigiano Reggiano. And we don't want too much here, just a light dusting, which is going to add a little bit of flavor, but more importantly, an amazingly beautiful golden brown color. And at this point, our calzone is ready for the oven. But let me give you one quick tip first, which hopefully will help prevent your smoke alarms from going off. Because our oven's at 500, sometimes that excess cornmeal and possibly Parmesan on the pan will burn. So what I like to do is take a second and just sort of brush off that excess with a paper towel. And I know some of you are thinking, hey, I took the batteries out of my smoke alarm in the kitchen a long time ago. But that is incredibly dangerous and not recommended. So do this instead. And at this point, we can go ahead and transfer that into the center of a 500-degree oven for about 15 minutes, or until it's beautifully browned and looks something like this. If everything's gone according to plan, this should be visually stunning. And then let me burn myself a little bit here so you can see how beautifully that bottom browned. Oh yeah. And by the way, you're always going to get a little bit of juice that comes up through the holes at the top and then burns onto the bottom of the pan. Which reminds me, do yourself a favor and put some parchment paper down on the pan first. I mean, I'm not looking forward to cleaning that. Or at least I'm not looking forward to telling an intern they have to wash that. And then here's the deal. If you want to eat this right away, you can, but you're going to need a fork and a knife. But personally, I like to cut this in half and eat it with my hands, which in that case, we're going to want to let this rest at least 10 minutes. And of course, the international symbol for this pan is hot is a towel placed on the corner. Make sure you practice that and teach everyone in your household that, especially the kids. But anyway, I did let mine cool about 10 minutes, and then I served it up. And because I ordered the lunch special, mine came with a small side salad, as well as a little spicy marinara for dipping. I will assume that's not traditional. And that's it. I believe we've successfully navigated the highway to the calzone zone. I would like to at this time apologize to Kenny Loggins and his entire family. But anyway, that looks too good not to dig into. And like I said when we took this out of the oven, if you want to serve this right away, you can. But that molten hot filling is going to be very, very runny. So I do like to let mine cool a little, so I can use a bare hand delivery system. So let's split that in half and take a look. That filling's still nice and hot, but not runny. And we have that gorgeous creamy cheesiness from our sheep's milk ricotta, which you really should try to find. And then not one, but 2 kinds of ham. And you could do it with just one or the other. But I really do find this much more interesting if you use both. And while I do like to eat mine by hand, there is no shame in your game if you use a fork. I mean, this is not like pizza. You use a fork for pizza, you should be put in jail. But anyway, that's it, my take on the old calzone, which I believe in Italian means hot pocket. I could be wrong, but I think that's what it is. So like I said, we'd had a ton of requests for this recipe, and I just hadn't gotten around to filming it. But hopefully it was worth the wait. So I really do hope you give this a try. Head over to foodwishes.com for all the ingredient amounts and more info as usual. And as always, enjoy.